Welcome to this episode of New Teacher Talk. Today, Beth and I have a special guest, Dr. Rudy Ruiz of Edifying Teachers. We're so happy to have you here today, Dr. Ruiz. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So happy to support the work that you all are doing to get the word out about new teachers and what they need. It's been 23 years now since I was a new teacher back in my hometown of Milwaukee with Milwaukee Public Schools. My family and I now have been out in Maryland for about a decade, but really thinking and connecting with so many educators around the country and around the world these days. So really happy to be connected with you all today.
We're so interested in learning more about edifying teachers. And in particular, we're curious about how did you conceptualize the founding of your organization that has national appeal?
Well, thanks so much for the question. As I kind of alluded to, I myself at one point was a new teacher. And so, based initially on kind of those lived experiences, as we'd call them, I was surprised to be open with you about my experience. I grew up in the inner city of Milwaukee. And so I had the opportunity to get a lot of great experiences growing up, my K-12 experiences, and had the opportunity to have some great options for my undergraduate college experience. And I felt the most at home out west. I spent most of my life in Milwaukee, but happened to have been born in California and went to college in California. So I came back home after graduating from Stanford University and was thinking, wow, wouldn't it be great to be able to give back to my old neighborhood? And so I started teaching in what would have been my neighborhood public high school and was assigned as a high school math and computer science teacher and supporting our emergent bilingual students in those areas. And I thought, wow, they're really gonna, administration and the school system is really going to wrap their arms around me. And since I'm a good role model for these young people, they'll give me all the support I need. Unfortunately, the system wasn't designed that way. And over the years, I, just continued to think about that. And it's been through that thinking and connecting with others that Edifying Teachers has come to life as a way to design a better system of support for new teachers.
How did you come up with a name for your organization?
It's a great question. We had, been thinking about these issues and what might be some ways to do better by teachers for a while. And so along the way, I was a classroom teacher for 8 years in Milwaukee Public Schools. Really loved that experience on the south side of Milwaukee and moved into school and then district leadership. But while I was a teacher, I had the opportunity to continue my education and earn my master's degree in instructional technology. And so along the way, I was starting to think about these issues of teacher turnover, once I moved into leadership and once I moved out to the East Coast here now, almost a decade in Baltimore. And so I started researching issues further. After I moved out here to Baltimore, I enrolled at the Johns Hopkins School of Education, and they said, well, if you want to enroll in this EDD doctoral program as a practitioner, you'll have to decide in your application what's a specific problem of practice that you've seen and experienced think is important. And so for myself, I said, well, do I want to research teacher turnover or leadership turnover? And I said, well, both are big issues, but when it comes to students getting what they need, seeing too many students having too little support when it comes to core areas like math and just overall. And so let me look at these issues of teacher attrition. And so I started exploring those issues and thinking about ways that, again, we could better support teachers in a more personalized way. And I thought about how we might be able to do that through some support with technology. And as I was thinking about those things and researching those things, the pandemic happened. And I realized that my experiences as a teacher were going to be a lot different than current new teachers' experiences. And so I said, well, I better start connecting with a lot more current educators so that if we are providing support for other teachers, it's support that they can relate to and folks that they can relate to. We're trying to give, teachers whole teacher support, and we realized that it's all about edifying them. And so it was a name that resonated and covers a lot of bases, and it also allows us to think about having a bigger impact in different places. And so as we start to grow our work, we're edifying Baltimore, we're edifying Texas, we're getting ready to edify Minnesota and a whole lot of other places. So it's a handy, useful name, and we're excited to grow the work.
Well, I do have to say that I'm part of your Edifying Texas group,
Yes.
and I love the people that I work with. Even though I had my last meeting with one of my candidates last Wednesday, we're going to be continuing on to do a project together that's going to design curriculum around academic conversations in the classroom for a high school student. Because my edifyee, my mentee, found in his work that his students process verbally,
Mm,
but at the same time struggle to have those kinds of conversations with one another to get their ideas out. So we worked on some strategies that he was using throughout the second semester this year. And he said, what if we were to think about doing this, making a curriculum that I would start out with this curriculum and then move into my history curriculum? I can get behind that. So that's something we're collaborating on, and I'm really excited about it.
fantastic. That is really exciting. That is really exciting. I think it's a great example of the fact that we allow these conversations to be, very open conversations. We want to make sure that, we're attentive to individual needs and personalized needs. And also, we feel like the work that we're doing is answering what for too long has been the rhetorical question of what if we had a system that responded to what teachers are asking for. And so we have seen some survey results over the years, and especially for teachers of color and other underrepresented teachers. Sometimes when folks ask what will keep you in the classroom, the answer isn't just salary, even though we endorsed some federal legislation to make sure that teachers have a more appropriate higher salary. We know that oftentimes teachers are saying, I wish I had more professional development and support. I wish I had support with career navigation. And so your example that is helping take that young educator to the next level as an educator, as a lifelong learner, and in new, fresh ways is a really powerful example of the fact that we're very open to being responsive to what growth should look like and can look like in different ways in different places for different people.
Absolutely. And also, we see that especially new teachers feel like they are siloed, that they don't necessarily have people that are really there for them. It's about putting them through a program. It
Yes.
isn't about looking at them as a person, that whole person, that sometimes they don't always fit in the box of what the program is doing for
Yeah.
you. And they need that mentorship that's going to help them self-actualize to the people that they're meant to be, not just what that little program is telling that
Mm.
you need to be.
Absolutely. Yeah, we feel like we're building on a lot of good foundational work, and we know that there's so much research over these last couple of decades on the power and impact of instructional coaching. But we feel that instructional coaching is a big piece of the pie, but it's just a piece of the pie. And so we want to make sure that teachers have support in other areas. We know that teachers, aren't generally leaving the profession just because they didn't get good instructional coaching. We know that there are other aspects of navigating school, navigating, relationships within schools. New teachers need help and mentorship around. Dr. Beth, one thing that you may not have heard about lately in terms of the development of our approach is that we actually give a lot of agency to the mentees, to the new teachers, to Dr. Anna's point around, how they identify and what their needs are. We don't just say, hey, we've got a great mentor for you. Here she is. We actually say, we've looked at your background. We looked at, including training background and, demographics, all those things. Here are a few well-matched prospective mentors, and here's what they have to say about their approach and their background. You get to choose who you most identify with. And we've found that that's a really powerful way for them to feel that they're getting the mentorship that they're looking for and that will be meaningful for them.
Really value that approach because it gives people that option to make those decisions. It's about what their needs are rather than being told, here's your mentor.
Yes,
Rather, choose a mentor that really speaks to you that you feel will be a great match.
yes.
Dr. Ann and I did a national webinar about 2 months ago, and we had new teachers, early career teachers from 4 different parts of the country, the East, the West, the South, and the Midwest.
Wow.
They all shared some very poignant suggestions for those of us that are here working and supporting new teachers. And they all said in their own voice, we want to have that empowerment, that ability to make a difference, to be able to really focus in on what our needs are, because we are in the classroom. We
Yes.
want to make sure that we're doing the best job we can, but we need supports to do that. And so I really value the approach that Edifying Teachers is taking, because you are giving them that ability to be empowered.
Thank you so much. On that point, I mentioned about, how this has kind of grown out of my doctoral research, and, the core construct there is teacher self-efficacy. And so we know that teachers go into the profession because they believe that they can make a difference in the lives of students, both in their learning and in their overall life trajectory. And so often, the many challenges of the profession and just the reality shock, as it's called, in that first month can often be very discouraging. And teaching, unfortunately, is traditionally a pretty isolating profession. And so we're trying to both change that, but we're also trying to, mitigate any of those factors, provide some protective factors to encourage those teachers and make sure that sense that they can make a difference is supported by their mentor, and they understand that there's going to be a learning curve for them. There's going to be some growth that needs to happen. But, we see too often that without that type of mentorship, new teachers can feel like they're doing a disservice to students and leave the profession before they've had the chance to grow into it. And so we're very grateful for the opportunity to provide ongoing support to our mentees.
One of the other things that happens in an edifying mentoring session is the fact that each mentee has that opportunity to talk to someone who's not in their sphere. It gives them that safety net
Mm.
that the mentor is not going to go back and tell, I'm not going to tattle on you. If
Yes.
you say things that are real to you, you just are able to vent a little bit.
Sure.
Sometimes that needs to happen. And if you vent that way with someone that's maybe your direct supervisor, there's a different way that lands.
Yes.
And that same kind of venting that's happening with someone that you've already begun to develop an outside of my district relationship with.
Yes.
They have that space, that opportunity to speak to somebody, have that confidential conversation. I agree.
Yeah, so Dr. Beth, one of the questions that often comes up when we're talking with prospective new school and district partners is they're wondering, traditional mentorship 1.0 is to say, oh, there's a person down the hall that'll be your mentor this year. Oftentimes when we're talking to administrators, they'll say, well, you're assigning a mentor that isn't in the building. They're not going to know what's the latest and greatest and important things happening in the building. And, that's going to be a big miss. I think they overlook what you and Dr. Anna were just talking about in terms of those safe spaces. And what we've developed as we've continued to evolve as a way to solve for being aware of the happenings in the school and in the community is that folks like Dr. Anna, who are not necessarily in the community but are providing this kind of remote and virtual mentorship, they're supported by a local lead. And so we do have somebody who does go in person to the school partner school and connect with those mentees in person on a regular basis. And so every month behind the scenes, Dr. Anna and her colleagues, her fellow mentors, they're part of a virtual huddle. And so they get to check in with Magdalena Mata, another NBCT, who kind of says, hey, these are the latest things that are happening in this West Texas district. Here are some things that we want to make sure you're aware of, and vice versa, where Dr. Anna can kind of say, hey, here's some things that came up in our mentorship session. We don't share, again, those personal points that Dr. Anna mentioned, but instead what we do is kind of aggregate those, if you will. We say, hey, across this cohort, here are some themes that came up this month. And so we want to make sure that the school leadership understands, you can think of us as the adult version of a tier 2 intervention. And so sometimes there are things that need to happen at the school level that are more of a tier 1 issue. And so we want to make sure that the school leadership understands, hey, based on all these conversations we've had this month, let's think about whether you would like any support from us on some of these, maybe school climate or school culture or professional development needs that are coming out as themes in our conversations.
How was that liaison chosen?
That's a great question. And I mentioned the fact that both Dr. Anna and Magdalena are NBCTs. And so when we're talking with prospective new partners, we take time to get to know their needs. And so we know we have a lot of communities that are having a growing population, for example, of emergent multilingual learners. And so that's an area where we ask about places in the country, especially Texas, where they have many, many alternatively trained teachers. And so some of the foundational aspects of pedagogy may be missing. And so we want to make sure that we're understanding what are their priority needs. As we do that sense making with them of what are the priority needs in your community, that allows us to then tailor our recruitment of our local lead and then of our mentors to make sure that we have a very well-matched set of mentors for each engagement.
So, Dr. Rudy, you have been talking with a lot of places, with a
Yes.
lot of administrators, and working in a lot of districts.
Yes.
And as we look at new teacher support, what do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions about early career teachers?
I think it's easy for folks to make assumptions about what the needs may be. And so the bigger our network of mentors gets, the better we're able to humanize and personalize the support. Even in our early stages a couple years ago, while it was on the one hand powerful to be able to say, hey, you're a Black woman teaching pre-calculus in this Baltimore public school, guess what? We've got this amazing Black woman, former math coach, who is now a CAO in Michigan that can support you. And so being able to match across multiple evidence-based factors. But again, at that time, it was us saying, here's a mentor for you, and not giving that agency and autonomy to the mentee. And we didn't at the time attend to the fact that those two folks, one may have grown up in the suburbs, one may have grown up in the inner city like me. Their training may have been completely different. And so when we think about teachers and new teachers, it's important not to make assumptions about what they may be bringing or not bringing to the table, and really taking the time to get to know them and what their needs may be before assuming that we know what support they need.
And the fact that you speak about that, I think districts also need to really look at their new teachers in that same light, where
Yes.
they're not looking at them as just this is one size fits all.
Yes.
Each one of those new teachers brings strengths and they bring some needs to your district, to your school, and to tailor those mentor programs or induction programs to those real needs of teachers, not just what your perceived needs might be,
That's
which again gets back to that sense of agency that's necessary for new teachers.
Yes.
I think that's the big paradigm shift when induction and mentoring programs began and really started to track those in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s. It was very cookie cutter. Here's our induction mentoring program. Everybody will go through the same path and you'll come out the other end having received very similar experiences or support. And we know that all early career teachers have very different needs. And they're also coming to the profession from different pathways. Some of them, it's a second career. Some of them, alternatively certified. Some traditionally prepared. Some have been parents before, so they have some background working with younger children or with young adults. Because of that diversity within where teachers are coming from, we're very interested in learning more from you, Dr. Rudy, about the significance of diversifying the teaching profession. Might you speak to that?
Absolutely. We've got a situation too where we want to make sure that every student has a teacher who can support their needs. When we talked to our very first school partner here in Baltimore, they said, we love your mission. We love what you're working toward and how you're approaching it. 99% of our students are Black. We do have some teachers of color. We see that that's a focus for you all. We would love it if you could support our new teacher cohort. Not all of them are teachers of color, but can you support all the teachers in the new teacher cohort? And we said, of course, we want to make sure that, your whole student body has well-supported teachers. When we think about making sure that all teachers understand, how to connect and see families from an asset-based lens, we know that there's a lot of value in making sure that all teachers have that type of support. We think about that certainly. And I think we also think about the fact that the mentee and mentor relationship is a two-way learning relationship. Both our mentors, of course, are providing support, but our mentees are also providing new insights to our mentors. It's a collaborative learning process. And I think Dr. Anna could probably also share some examples from her own experiences providing some mentorship this year.
Absolutely. One of the things that I found from the teachers that I've been working with in Ector is that there is a large group of newcomers who come to their classrooms, and some of them struggle a little bit with how to look at families that have not had the experience in America.
Yes.
And often when you're working with the child, you're also working with the whole family. And
Yes.
you have to be ready to work with the whole family in order to give them some support. It's interesting making a parallel. I teach at NIU, and one of my students is a newcomer from Laos. And so it was interesting. I had a whole group of international students who weren't prepared for the Midwestern winter. And so we came to class and it was snowing out and people were in shorts and sandals. So, we think about how do we manage that? We think about how do we help students manage the healthcare system? How do we help students manage the food insecurity that many of them have? So it's more than just teaching your class, working with that student. It's about reaching out to do more and help them find those other supports that are necessary for their success. They came to our country because they wanted something better, something more for their family. So it's often through our education system that we need to find ways to reach out and do more support for these children and their extended families.
Yes. Thank you for that. In terms of my own family heritage, I'm Chicano, so my family moved up from Texas and Mexico almost 100 years ago up to Milwaukee. Growing up throughout my 20 plus years of formal education, I never had a Latino teacher in my experience. And so right now, being in Maryland, half of our schools don't have a single Latino teacher. Up the road in Pennsylvania, half the schools don't have a single teacher of color. And so while some of the grow your own programs that we collaborate with and support are going to help bring more young people of color into the profession, oftentimes they will be the first in the building, potentially the first in the community of that background in that school or in that community. And so while it's a nice idea, it's also can be a very challenging situation to be in. Again, when I talk with prospective school and district administrators in those places, they again call out the fact that well, we don't know if, what the value might be of a mentor from outside of our school or outside of our community. What we've been finding is that there's this notion that people are now getting familiar with about sense of belonging for students, but it's just as important for teachers. And what we found is that even though we may not be able to affirm a teacher's sense of belonging in their particular school, by having a mentor that they identify with, that actually does increase their sense of belonging in the field, which has the intended impact because our ultimate goals are around retention and growth in the profession. And our outcomes have been incredible in terms of helping our mentees feel supported and stay and grow in the profession.
It's really critically important that early career teachers and all teachers are able to represent the student body that they're working with. We know that to be true. I mean, Richard Ingersoll's research has shown that diversity is growing so quickly, but the profession itself is not growing at fast enough a rate from a diversification standpoint.
That's what we see in the work that you're doing with edifying teachers. So could you tell us a little bit more about the different places that edifying is working in around the nation?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, yeah, those points resonate so much with me. Our mantra is rehumanizing education through the power of connection. And you mentioned Dr. Richard Ingersoll, and he was really the first one to point out that, especially at the time, we didn't have so much a recruitment issue as a retention issue. And if we just did a better job of retaining the teachers that were coming into the profession, we'd actually be in good shape. So I've been working here in my second home state of Maryland. We've been working in Texas. We're getting ready to work over the next at least 3 years through some good news that will be public by the time this episode gets broadcast in the state of Minnesota. The Minnesota Department of Education is really kind of quietly been at the forefront of making sure that there are actual resources behind increasing teacher diversity. And so they've got a really great couple state grant opportunities, and we're pleased to be part of one of those for starters. So we're collaborating with a Black-led nonprofit called the Uplift Movement, led by Jonathan C.W. Jones. And we're going to be partnering there to recruit, train, and deploy BIPOC mentors to support BIPOC mentees, as many as 100 in the second year. So very excited about that. And we've got some really great conversations building, anticipating doing some work with teacher residents, actually. So beginning our pre-service support work here in partnership with my alma mater, Johns Hopkins School of Education. They've got our new teacher residency program rolling out. So we'll be supporting on that. We're also getting ready to do some work, hopefully out in the state of California pretty soon, and a number of other places. The more the word gets out, I think the more people realize the relevance of the work, but it's all because we put teachers, and especially teachers of color, at the heart of the design process. I realized even just last week about the work that we do and the way that we do it, Dr. Anna, is that each session that you and your mentors provide is really what could be thought of as an empathy interview. We're hearing, what new teachers need right now. And so this is an always evolving model that's going to stay up to date, because we know that the needs in whatever month it may be are going to be a little different the next month. We've kind of found a formula, I guess, for staying up to date and making sure that each day's teacher has timely support.
That's wonderful. And I know in my experience, the way that we go ahead and we keep a documentation of our sessions, it's really helpful to be able to think about how a person has grown. And I love the fact that you always are thinking about the 4M so that we can really think about where is that person? What is that person's pathway? What is it that they really seem to need? And I also appreciate that you think about the 3 C's. And in terms of making sure that as a mentor that I'm thoughtfully thinking about how each of those pieces fit into that person's concerns or needs at the particular time, and being mindful of addressing not just one aspect of that person's practice or humanity, but looking at how do we really infuse all of those important points throughout our mentorship time.
Yes. We don't want to be too inside baseball for you here, Dr. Beth, so I want to make sure we shed a little light on the 4Ms and the 3Cs. We talked earlier about self-efficacy, and so the gentleman who introduced that concept to the field, Dr. Bandura, he had somewhat technical terms for the pathways to self-efficacy. We feel it's really important to use accessible language and make it easy for everybody to understand best practice. And so one of the ways we do that is through some alliteration and some easier ways to remember some of the evidence base. And so with respect to self-efficacy, we have done a little bit of rebranding on Dr. Bandura's 4 pathways. The 4Ms that Dr. Anna was alluding to have to do with the fact that, we all struggle, but we need support from a mentor. So that's, of course, number 1. But also with having a positive mindset about that, and what you might call as a growth mindset about that. Eventually, we do want to make sure that the mentee develops mastery of the skill. On the MBCT front, that's one of the places where we do incorporate classroom instructional video. And so the mentees, of course, have to submit that. So that's an aspect. But essentially, we want to make sure that mentors like Dr. Anna are identifying some ways of modeling what we want to see. So those are the 4Ms. And then with respect to the 3Cs, one of the pieces that we haven't had a chance to talk about yet, we talked about the career navigation. That's one. And so we document when that comes up in the conversation. We also talked about being culturally sustaining. But what we haven't talked about is probably might be the most powerful aspect of our motto, which is it stands for collaboration. And so if Dr. Anna ever gets in a situation where her mentee is asking for something that, maybe isn't exactly in her wheelhouse, but she knows that Dr. Beth can give some good insights on it, or Magdalena can give some good resources on it. That's something that we're looking for, is how can we facilitate some collaboration and extend out the network of the mentee and give them access to greater resources. So ultimately, we feel that we are actually giving the mentees time back in their life, quality time, and more of their life back. And we know that a big reason for teacher burnout is that teachers are putting in so many extra hours a week, and especially teachers in under-resourced schools. And so instead of having the Sunday scaries spending hours and dollars trying to find resources on the internet, if you make that 30 minutes to meet up with Dr. Anna, she's going to give you some nuggets and some resources and a lot of that time back.
I really think that the collaborative piece that you just talked about, Dr. Rudy, is really what professional education is all about.
Yes.
We're not individuals succeeding in the classroom, but we are a team of people working together to make a difference. And it's nice to know that there are supports out there, especially in under-resourced schools. I did want to ask you, because your work has taken you all across the country, what advice would you give to early career teachers and those that support them? Because we have people who listen to this podcast channel who are not just early career teachers, but are induction coordinators, or they're working in some capacity, maybe at the state level, to provide support to those entering the profession. So, what advice would you give to those two groups?
Well, I think my main advice is to look at the data and look underneath the data. And so the data will usually show new teachers don't get ongoing job embedded professional development and support. And so just looking at how many actual mentorship sessions are happening. And what we're discovering is that oftentimes those aren't happening for the relational challenges we mentioned, not having somebody you could identify with, but also structural challenges. So that's another piece that we feel like we've solved for, which is the fact that you mentioned some of the teachers may be parents. And so, that's some of the pieces of day-to-day life that we've discovered have been difficult, is even if I love my mentor, Dr. Anna is the perfect mentor for me. If our schedules don't match up, we're not going to connect. Or if our technology comfort levels are different, we may not connect. And so making sure that folks understand, is mentorship happening? And if not, why not? And then solving for that. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that new teachers are getting the support that they need.
If our audience would like to contact you, how would they be able to do that?
So we've got two simple buttons on our website. If you want to be a mentor, it's easy to sign up. If you want to bring mentorship to your school community, it's easy to ask for that. And my email address is very simple. It's just rudy@edifyingteachers.com.
Thank you. I really think that once some of our listeners hear what Edifying Teachers has to offer, you might have some people that are expressing some interest in what Edifying is doing and might want Edifying to come to their own districts or schools.
That would be great. We love that.
And how does that process work? If there's an early career teacher that listens to this podcast and says, wow, this sounds like something our district should know about, do they just contact you directly?
They can definitely do that. We have a lot of, network connections, and they may be in a place that we were already talking to. So it's good to know, and it's good for administrators to know that their teachers are asking for this and want this. And so, yeah, just connecting to us, like I said, rehumanizing education through the power of connections. Wherever you are, in the ecosystem, as we call it, feel free to reach out.
Speaking of connections, is there anything else before we close today that you'd like to share that we really haven't covered?
I would just say that, we need to make sure that our new teachers are feeling supported, in so many different ways. I think we've got a lot of ground to make up for in terms of, what's been referred to as kind of teacher bashing over the last decade. And so I think there are a lot of light and easy ways to let teachers know that they're valued and supported. And so whatever seat you're in, I think you got your different options. So I would just encourage everybody to show some love to the new teachers and to all teachers.
Thank you.
Thank you so much today for being our guest, Dr. Rudy. And thanks to our listeners for listening today. And we hope you'll become a follower of our podcast. Check us out on X at New Teacher Talk 1 and on Instagram at New Teacher Talk. Remember, we're here to assist you.